Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Curling Legends podcast. My name is Kevin Palmer, and each week during the curling season, I'm going to share a conversation that I've had with a curling legend. In most cases, this will be a player from the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, 80s, or 90s. We're going to attempt to cover the game from its early days and the invention of the curling slide to the formation of the free guard zone and its adoption in the 1990s. In addition to players, we'll have a few conversations with members of the media who covered the sport at that time. And perhaps in other instances, we'll just have someone come on who has a story to tell. And that's really what we're looking for, is to have great storytellers and great stories that give us a glimpse into the history of curling. If I haven't already contacted you and you'd like to share your story or have a conversation, you can reach me by emailing contact@curlinglegends.ca, and would love to include you in the podcast. If you're listening to this, you've clearly figured out actually how to listen to a podcast. So congratulations, that's the first step. But you may be listening on our Facebook page. If you're not, just so you know, we have a Facebook page, and you can go there and ask questions or make comments and posts related to the podcast and any of our guests. We also have a podcast webpage that is curlinglegends.ca, so you can find all of our episodes there, and you can use iTunes, Stitcher, any number of apps for listening to podcasts to find and subscribe to our show as well. I want to thank Gerry of Curling Zone for his support of the podcast and helping with hosting the episodes out there on the World Wide Web. I want to thank Stephen Lobel of Lobel Design, who created our logo for the podcast. You may be able to guess who the player is that logo was created from. Pee Wee Pickering, a great player out of Saskatchewan, who never did win a Brier, although he came close. A very distinct backswing that we don't really see in the modern era today. Pat Ryan began his curling in Winnipeg and then later found success in Alberta as a skip, and then later in British Columbia playing third for Rick Folk. Pat's had 10 Brier appearances, along with 3 appearances in the World Championship after winning the Brier, twice as a skip and 1 playing for Rick. And he managed to win 2 of those World Championships in 1989 and 1994. And without rambling any further, let's get on to our conversation with Pat Ryan. The first question, I guess, would be related to how you got started. There's usually somebody who got you interested in curling. Did your parents curl? What was your kind of first start in the game, and whereabouts was that at?
Okay, well, I grew up in Winnipeg, and my dad was the president of the Assiniboine Memorial Curling Club way back when I was a little tyke, and so he got me involved with curling. And back in those days, actually, juniors weren't necessarily welcome in the curling setting. But him and a couple of his friends had young boys, and they managed to allow us to get out there and shoot some rocks and practice a little bit. The ice maker there was accommodating, but really back then it was hard to get on the ice because you were kind of a nuisance.
Really?
In the old
at the Assiniboine.
Well, actually, the Assiniboine Memorial was there was a original, I think it was called the Assiniboine Memorial. It burned down. And then he was active there. I think he was the president when it burned, or the new club was built then where it stands today. And that's where I started to curl at the new Assiniboine Memorial Curling Club.
Okay, no, that's because
it's not really that new.
Yeah, well, and that's actually where I grew up as well. So I mean, I curled, Saturday juniors there, started curling there. That was, for us back in the 80s, they were very accommodating to juniors, and it became sort of known as the club of junior champions because of all the history later on. But I'm surprised I didn't actually know that they Was that common in a lot of clubs at that time, or was it the Assiniboine in particular, or just juniors weren't as well received as I guess they became later?
Well, I think back, I'm older than you, so we go back to the time when probably golf courses were the same. It was a men's club, and I think I know the women curled, so it wasn't quite gender specific, but kids were kind of in the way, I think, back in those days, and that's, when am I going back to here? Probably about 1965 or so.
Uh-huh.
So I'd be 10 years old, and to get on the ice you had to make sure you were in good standing with the ice maker, Mr. Gessner. All of us back then knew Mr. Gessner because he was the one who would, let you go out on the ice if a game ended early, and you could go out and play for 20 minutes before the next draw without bothering the people in the next sheet. But that's kind of the way it was. I think golf courses were much the same. Now today you see them quite turned around. The Assiniboine Memorial might have been one of the early clubs that, through the efforts of people like my father and some of the other fathers, Mark Olson, his dad, was one of the other guys that was involved, and they kind of made it easy for us to get out there and start to shoot rocks up and down the sheets. And of course, the Assiniboine Memorial grew from there, and it became a spot where Kerry Burtnick came out of, and all kinds of world champions came out of that junior program, the Assiniboine Memorial.
Yeah, Mert Thompson, and the Urso boys played out of there. The McFadden with John Meade, who played with him at the time, and so a number of junior rinks came out of there. So who were some of the rink rats that kind of hung out with you at the time? And I remember those days when you just sort of hang out at the end of the sheet, wait for games to end. Who were some of the others? So who was around at the time?
Well, there wasn't Randy Wojtowicz. Mm-hmm. So you would have seen him play the Brier final against Kevin Martin. He's now in Saskatchewan, so he was one of the teams. The club burned down again, or the actual club there on that site was the new Assiniboine Memorial Curling Club. It actually burned down while we were in the junior program, and so we were without a curling club as juniors, and we played. The only two teams that were playing was my team, which had Mark Olson, my brother Jeff, and another fellow, Donnie Evans, and we played every Sunday morning. That's when we had to play our junior program. We played against Randy Wojtowicz and his brother Rick, and we had to drive across the city to, I think we went to Valor Road or another curling, not the Granite, the Grain Exchange, and we would play our junior game against them every Sunday. and it was kind of a excursion. I think we raced cars there and back, being young irresponsible people, and so half the fun was just the race home in the cars. But we played our junior game, so that was the only junior team in our curling club.
So it's just the two ranks. And how did you decide? Back in that age, like how did it turn out that one guy became the skip and another guy would play lead? How did you guys make those kind of decisions, and how were those teams formed originally when you were in your early days?
Oh man, I think how did I end up skipping? I think I was the oldest, so maybe I was just had a little bit more skill than the others. But Mark Olson, he's a couple of years younger than me. He skipped a little bit too, and then of course he went on to win the juniors and then playing with Kerry Burtnick. He was the third again, but I think it was probably more on age. My brother Jeff, he's 3 years younger, so he was our lead, I think, and that was kind of how it went. It's funny too. I can remember playing the games, and what we would do is you weren't supposed to. There was no coaching back then, but I know that my dad would sit upstairs watching, and he had a signal for me, which was to hit or to draw, because I never, you always tell me. And I know he'd have his hand on the glass or on the windowsill. And if he just sort of laid his flat hand on top of it, kind of like paper cover stone, well, that was a draw. And then I think the other one was he just left his hand there in a fist, just that was a hit. And that was probably illegal back then.
I'm sure it was. Yeah, I heard stories of coaches using the cigarette case. That was the other one, where if the cigarette case looked a certain way, that meant hit, and if it was turned the other way, it was a draw. So little things like that.
Yeah,
so
that kind of thing, yeah.
Your dad wasn't the only one using those tricks, I'm sure.
Yeah. And we didn't even have coaches. Coaches didn't come into the game for many years. But that was just because you didn't want people up behind the glass waving at the kids on the ice. So that was, and basically I always remember he just always said to draw.
Yeah.
As soon as we would fire hits, well, you're just running out of options.
Yeah, well, and that's a question. So because of course you're sort of famously known as the Ryan Express and the team that was really the precursor to the movement towards free guard zone. Back in that time, how did you approach the game? Were you as a young player, and who were you watching, and what was kind of your approach to how you evolved your strategy?
We didn't really. There was nothing to watch because there was nothing on television. Early on, just learning the game, it was just kind of trying to figure out how to slide. And one of the guys on our team, he had observed Don Duguid's slide, and he came out one time when we were out practicing, and he's taught us all how to do the tuck slide, at least the way he saw it happening. And that's how all the curlers, basically, at least from that era, our era, we started sliding tuck because that was how Don Duguid slid, and that just multiplied. And so it's still there in Manitoba, and it's all because of Don Duguid's slide, and we learned that. And then it's been a successful, obviously a very successful form of delivery, and it still continues. But nobody teaches it anymore. But I imagine they must still teach it in Manitoba because the younger guys are still coming out with tuck slide.
Yeah, I don't think it's taught traditionally through the kind of the Curl Canada programs, but I know that when I was young, oddly enough, I didn't start the tuck slide. It didn't really seem too natural to me, but I know a lot of people did it because of Kerry Burtnick, and that was pretty common in that time, and I didn't even realize that really it was Duguid that was sort of the precursor to a lot of that, and certainly Barry Fry, and looking at his delivery, the snake, he had quite the slide as well, and I remember a young Ryan Fry in a curling camp back when I was quite young, and he's quite a few years younger than me. I was helping out at the camp at the time, and yeah, he was. You were never going to get him to flat foot. It was never going to happen. Yeah. I didn't even realize that's largely how that started out. So did you play some like bonspiels? Did you ever, as you were kind of getting a little bit older, did you get to play against the men at some point? Like, how did you start to, I guess, improve? What was sort of the steps that happened there?
Well, I ended up in high school. I was playing hockey a lot. I think around grade 11, I was like, I don't know, 15 or 14 or whatever that age would be. Our hockey team was not that good. I didn't get much ice time at that point, but I was quite enjoying curling because we were winning games, and we were starting to beat the older kids that we were playing against. And I played men's league, so I spared with my dad's team and with some of his friends, and so I really enjoyed as a kid being treated equal to grown-up men, and calling them by their first name, which was kind of an odd thing back then. You always called everybody Mister, and so it was kind of neat. I quite liked the kind of the step into being more like a grown-up, and so I went to curling at about grade 11, or I stayed at curling, and I dropped hockey. And some of my friends in high school were also quite active into curling out of the Deer Lodge Curling Club. Dave Iverson, John Allardyce, and Bob Christie. So we were classmates, and we decided to go in the schoolboy bonspiel together, and we won the province, which was 7th grade 12. That was really probably a pivotal experience for me because it was the first time I ever got on an airplane and off we went to Moncton, New Brunswick, and we got to play in a national championship, which of course none of us knew what all that was about. But once we were there, and I think just the way people treated us, it was quite different to be treated like you were a little bit of a star in some fashion, because of course we were just kids growing up in Winnipeg. You never got treated any different. But there we got treated really well, and we came back to school after that. The kids in the school were saying, "Hey, way to go!" And wow, I didn't even know they knew what curling was. And I think that was just good personally for me, for a little bit of I don't know what you call it, self-esteem or something like that. But I quite enjoyed the feedback I felt from the sport itself, and it gave me the urge to want to go back to a national championship. And so a number of years later, after I finished college and got settled into my working life, I started to play competitive men's, and I definitely wanted to go to the Brier to again maybe experience some of that good feedback that I had as a junior.
Well, first question of that. You played out of your lodge at that point. Now, was your father still associated with the Assiniboine, and wasn't that seen as a little bit of a Benedict Arnold, or was that not a big deal at the time? Cause
there was competitiveness between the curling clubs, but the three guys, they were Deer Lodge, and I was Assiniboine. I still played Assiniboine as well with my brother and with Mark Olson, and Kerry Burtnick was coming in around that point in time. I never played with Kerry. I don't think, not anything at any length anyway. It was just a club that the other three guys were at. It was actually right near where I live. So, I didn't think much about whether there was Benedict Arnold involved there. We were just kids, and we were happy to get on the ice anywhere we could.
So there was no ill will at the Assiniboine at the time, that one of their own had gone off and.
Sorry.
Like there was no ill will.
No, actually. Oh no, the Assiniboine. I still remember the big send off that they gave us. And actually, when we came back, they had a big, it felt like a big to do reception for us when we came back. We didn't win the Canadians, but we had a good showing. But they had a reception for us at the Assiniboine Memorial. So I think it was probably like we were representing both clubs when we went there.
Do you recall who won the schoolboys that year?
Yeah, but I don't remember the name. It was a team from Ontario, and I think it was 1973. Is that they didn't pursue curling, any of them, but I could be wrong on that. But I'm pretty sure they kind of didn't pursue it after that. Like I said, I could be wrong.
So Pat, you mentioned that. Did you sort of take a break then past juniors, and you mentioned getting your career going? Did you at least curl a little bit? Did you curl competitively at all, or at that point did you kind of take a step back while you got started in your career?
Yeah, there's probably a interesting point for people listening today. My dad didn't want me to become what he referred to as a curling bum. And because he'd seen a lot of young kids come up, curl, and then just that's all they pursued in life. And he pointed out, different people that did that, but they weren't chasing down anything else in life. And so he was pretty influential in me deciding after the curling in grade 12 to go to college and kind of just put the curling, don't try to go and repeat right after grade 12, because in essence, I think watching through my career, I've just seen a lot of young guys get beat up badly and probably get disillusioned and drop the game, trying to step right into men's after maybe having some good success in junior. So, but basically that's what I did. Is I went to school and then ended up getting a business administration degree, and then eventually the CMA designation and other things passed. I sort of continued with my education throughout my life with different things I've done, different schools I've gone to. But that said, I did take a break while I went to Red River College, I did curl on their I was their curling. I was a skip of the curling team, and we did compete. We did go to the Four Western Provinces Championship, and we won that 2 years in a row. And one time though, they even sponsored us to go on a bonspiel out at Morden. So that was the first men's spiel I'd ever gone in. Now as I'm talking, you're saying to yourself, boy, Pat, you really didn't quit curling. But actually, I really wasn't curling very much, except for with my new buddies at college. And John Bubbs, of course, Manitoba, famous curler there, Brier player, and he was my third, and we went off and we went to Morden and we played in the men's bonspiel there, and we won the cash deal, which was quite amazing because we were more focused on partying. But at that age, I guess you can do both. And so that too was probably a defining moment for me when I realized that, we can beat these men. I remember Barry Fry was there, and all these good, all the best Manitoba teams at the time were there, and somehow we won it. But then I finished my education, moved to Edmonton, and started working, and didn't go in playdowns or anything the first year. And then the next year, that was when Paul Devlin moved out to Alberta, and I hooked up with him.
Do you remember how much you won in that cash spiel?
Oh, it might have been something like, I don't know, maybe $4,000. It was a lot of money for us because we were, the epitome of starving students.
Yeah, and what year might that have been then? Is that late 70s now, or?
Well, that would have been maybe 70. Might have been 75. Morden, the Morden All-Star bonspiel.
Yeah, so in 1975, I mean, $4,000, that's going to buy you a car, isn't it, at that point? Obviously, you had to split it four ways, but...
The car I had was cost $300, so yeah, I could buy two cars.
So you make your way to Edmonton, really as a career direction? Is that really what brought you to Edmonton originally? Yeah,
Imperial Oil hired me and hired Derek Devlin, who was Paul's younger brother, and about eight other people from our class, and we moved up to downtown Edmonton in their accounting finance office, and then part of the arrangement was that we needed to be pursuing our professional designations, accounting designations, and so the whole class continued. So we continued on living there, but in school and working for Imperial Oil. Then a year later, Derek's brother Paul, he moved from Winnipeg to Edmonton, and Paul had been playing with Rod Hunter, and he was a left-hander, and they had all a left-handed team back then, with Danny Fink and Rod Hunter and him and Jeff May, I think it was. And,
so four left-handers.
Gary Willis.
Four left-handers.
Yeah. They I don't know if you remember those guys, but they took this left sleeve off two sweaters, a blue one and a white one, and they had them re-sewn so that when they walked on the ice, they always had a different colored left arm. It was kind of cool. Anyway, Paul moved out to Edmonton, and we played. So I played my first time in zone play with him, and wouldn't you know it, but we lost the final of the province to Ed Lukowicz, and so that was in 1978, and so that obviously made us hungry. And the next year we were just a little bit better, and we beat Ed Lukowicz and went to the Briers.
So that was literally your first year, sort of getting back into the game, getting back. You'd probably stayed with it a little bit, I'm assuming, through the years, but saying I'm going to, get a team together, and it was essentially that the very first year you're in Alberta that you put a team together, you lose the province and lose the finals.
Well, the first year we didn't go into the zones. I was playing with a fellow named Robbie King, who was a former Winnipegger also, and he had won the junior Canadian. So we did. Derek Devlin and I curled with him in 1977, but we played Super League. We didn't go and enter the play down. So it was in 1978 when Paul moved out that we, Derek really, I didn't even, honestly, I didn't even know how it worked to enter and whether we should enter or why would we enter it. So I wasn't but Derek was keen and his brother was keen. And so I came on the team and I was the second and Rod Hunter's brother, John, he was our third. So, I kind of got swept in by they were doing the organizing and they knew what it was. I was a good curler, obviously, but I didn't really understand, how the zones worked and how did you enter and what happened. But they looked after that. Anyways, so in 1978, that's when we.
So at that time, though, because you mentioned that the realization when you won the Canadians as a junior that, or when you got to the Canadians as a junior, there likely would still be an interest down the road. But it seems like you were still very capable, though, of segmenting that to the side, focusing on other aspects of life, pursuing your career, and then stepping back into it. But the Brier, the desire to reach the Brier hadn't left you, had it? Or was it maybe something that didn't seem at the time that was you were going to focus on at that stage?
Yeah, I think I never lost the desire. I probably had way too much desire, I don't know, some kind of competitive instinct or spirit towards curling. And I loved curling. I loved throwing the rock. And back then, a lot of the focus on how hard you could sweep with the corn brooms and the rink rats and things like that. So there was all that fun that went with it. I went after figuring out, how I was going to, what I was going to do for a career, for a job, or for work. And the curling, I never lost any touch. I don't think, by not playing very much for, I guess about 3 or 4 years. In fact, I think looking back on it, I think when I stepped in to play, a few years older, a little more mature, I think I was mentally very ready and very feeling like I fit and I was okay there. So I probably that time away was probably beneficial for me. I don't think it hurt at all.
Now you mentioned some time at second, so that means did you sweep with the corn, or were you into the rink rat at that point, or?
Oh yeah, corn brooms. That was what we played with, and then we went to rink rats in 1973. We went to the junior Canadians with rink rats, and we were corn broom in 1978. I was second, so. Yeah, can you believe it? Yes, I actually do sweep. Most people think skips don't sweep, but from that area you had to sweep, and I was the second. So we like to sweep, and we like to go end to end. And we went to the Brier, we went to the provincial final in 1978 against Ed Lukowicz, and they had push brooms and we had corn brooms, and we lost the final, and Paul Devlin said, "We're no longer using corn brooms." So he's actually he just won the Canadian seniors or something, or masters. I just saw his picture. They won it a couple of weeks ago. So he's a really, really bright guy when it comes to figuring out curling. So I had a great teacher. Anyways, he said, "No, we're not using corn anymore." So next year we went to push brooms, and then that's when we won the province and went to Brier in 1979 with push brooms. And then I've never I shouldn't say I've never gone back. We alternated a lot through the 80s because that was the era when both brooms coexisted in the sport, and so we used both. But I think when it got to be just after, probably around 1990, 92, they made a rule that you had to use the same broom for the entire game. and that really knocked the corn broom out of the game. You couldn't, because most people couldn't swing a corn broom hard for 10 ends.
Or 12 ends, or I guess as well back when you started.
Actually, I'm not quite that old, but just about.
Yeah.
I think it was always 10 ends when I played, but there were 12 ends just before that.
We were talking at the Brier last year, and you had mentioned that because of course all the broom controversy that was going on last year, that all of a sudden it was fascinating that teams had figured out other ways to manipulate the rocks using the synthetic, and then actually even hair brooms and so forth. You mentioned to me that back in your day, in the corn broom era, there was also controversy related to sweeping and techniques and things that were done. What can you tell us about that?
Well, if you think last year was something, that was, I would say, about 1/10 of the broom issues that I went through, or we went through back in the 80s, when both push brooms and corn brooms coexisted. It was a long process, and officiating was trying to compensate with different rules. Players were, taking it on themselves to police other players. There was issues. There was, I call them rivalries, would probably be a friendly word, between teams that were push broom and teams that were corn broom. It was really, really interesting to play because of all the physics involved when there was, a little bit of that corn broom chaff on the ice, or a little bit of it, or a lot of it. Every player on the ice on the team had to know where the clean patches were, and you only knew that by watching all the shots and seeing where people swept and where they didn't sweep. In essence, if you swept up the left side of the sheet, then you had to be aware that there would be chaff on the right-hand side of the sheet, because it sort of sprays. If it's on the ice, you're sweeping it away to somewhere else, or if it's in your broom, it's spraying a little bit somewhere else. And the stuff is pretty microscopic in most cases, so you don't see it, but it was one of those elements that's historically been a part of curling. It's one of the reasons that rocks curled, and one of the reasons they sometimes would slow down fast, which was a little bit what we saw last year, only people were doing it deliberately with the new brooms. So yeah, back in that era, we had lots of issues going one way or the other. The push broom, the corn brooms teams would sometimes try to really junk the ice up by bringing up brand new green brooms and really putting it all over the ice in the hopes that the push brooms couldn't keep it clean. And so then you had teams with push brooms that would snowplow in front of the rock in order to keep 100% of the time keep the chaff from running under the rock. And then they made rules up that you couldn't snowplow, because then the corn broom teams celebrated. The push broom teams were junking it by lifting their broom straight up when the rock got to the house, and of course the rock would plow right into the stuff and stop. So that was seemed to be illegal. They made rules up. You couldn't deliberately put something under the rock, or you couldn't deliberately cause a rock to slow down. And so fast forward to last year, when I saw what was going on, I went to the rule book. There was nothing in the rules. Somehow through 10 or 15 years of not seeing corn brooms, the rules got so simplified that there was no rules about snow plowing. There was no rules about deliberately junking a rock. And so players, the brooms happen to have that nature about them where they scratch the ice, maybe not to the naked eye, but that's what was happening. And they could slow a rock down by grinding the ice in front of it. And in the rule book, there was nothing that said anything about it. So we had rules galore back in the 80s. And officials would come out and kick off rocks if they didn't see the push broom moving enough side to side. corn broom teams would come out, and some of them would come out and sweep backwards. I probably remember one of those Brier finals. The team did that and just made some major advantages for themselves by sweeping what we call barrel first into the rock with a new corn broom, and that's basically where the broom isn't fanning outward and away. It's fanning straight into the underneath of the rock, and that will, if it's got the broom that was doing that, it would kill the forward progress and make the rock cut and go in behind the guard. That was happening. So they didn't have a rule against that, so they had to write a rule against that, and then they saw that some skips were in the house using corn brooms at times to their advantage and then not using them. And that's when they said, well, we're going to have to use the same, you have to stick with the same broom. That knocked the corn broom out. I would have loved to have seen them just maybe make the rules a little bit more clear about sweeping barrel first into the rock and not allowing something like that. And they probably could have, I think the two push brooms and corn brooms could have stayed in the game, and it would have been more interesting, definitely, to play with the two brooms in play. And teams sort of gradually start to understand what's acceptable and what isn't. But basically, it's a gentleman's game, and you don't want to be doing something that's kind of uncharacteristic of that. And so the teams normally they'll come back to a good median. Last year, it was just the shame of it was that for our team, I was coaching Jimmy Cotter, and we were when we went to the Brier, it didn't, two games in, and the guys were just totally depressed because we didn't have a chance unless we did the same thing. At least two of the guys on the team were refusing to do it because they felt it wasn't in the spirit of curling. So we kept losing and losing, and we almost didn't win a game until the last few, and we had to have a team meeting. So look, we're gonna fall into what do they call it when you have to go into the delegation?
The relegation.
We're going to fall into
the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to put BC into delegation because you can't beat any team out there that's doing it. It doesn't matter where they come from or how good they are. And so they did go with one sweeper on each side, and they did carve some rocks, and they did make a go of it, and they got themselves out of delegation. But a lot of players through that Brier last year, more than one of them said they'll quit curling. This isn't taken care of.
Part of it is this. Certainly curling has an appeal because it's a gentleman's game, and it's known as that, and you shake hands before and after, and often you might even have a beverage with the other team afterwards. But it's still sport, and I'm sure you've got lots of stories you can relate where teams are going to try to find an edge, and teams are going to try to push to be successful because they're competitive. And as you were even saying, back through the corn broom era, and as it was just towards the end of it, and the push brooms were entertained into the game. I'm sure there was also a lot of finger pointing back during that era as well. And was it a bit of a divide even between the types of teams, or even the age of the teams and age of players? Or was there a bit of that?
I don't know. Probably just, it's like you said, it's sport, so there's a lot of intensity if you're trying to, make your way to the top. And you do try to find advantages. And you want to find them within at least I think most of the players that I ever played with, you want to find those advantages, but within the spirit of the game. And sometimes, the more successful the team is, the more of a spotlight gets put on them, and people might start to think they may be bending it too much, and so you might take more heat. And that's common. The elite players generally get more criticism, whether it's fair or not, about whether they're doing something different. But it's you're always trying to find an edge. I remember when the synthetic brooms came in, that was Eddie Wernick's team. They had I forget what they were called. hammer brooms or something. But they were the same kind of, not the same surface as we saw last year, but it did have a little bit of that ability to maybe hold the line just a little bit better. I wouldn't say you could bend it, but we didn't use them. We liked the horsehair. They were basically, horsehair was easier to sweep with, so that's why I liked it. And I didn't think their brooms, I didn't give the consideration that their brooms were much of an advantage, but I think they felt they were. If they would put new heads on once or twice, even in a final, they might put a new head on once or twice just to make sure it was fresh. And so some of those things were happening, but the effect was so minimal that it wasn't identified as being any kind of a distortive advantage that we started to see last year. Last year, the horsehair brooms that were carving the rocks, I got to make clear, those weren't horsehair. Those were horsehair with plastic, fake, inserted hairs.
Yeah, they were synthetic hairs, if you will, really. Yeah.
So those that was something that was scratching the ice like the other the push brooms were last year in the Brier. A real horsehair broom absolutely does not cause a rock to curl. It's just really easy to sweep with. It's polishing effect. Yeah. And so when they banned horsehair, that was like a whipsaw overreaction. The banning horsehair brooms was just the most craziest thing.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to deal with frost going forward, because that becomes then an issue that actually can impact the game and the quality of the shot making if all of a sudden it's more difficult to try to control frost in certain situations. I saw that a bit at the Brier last year with the weather change in Ottawa. So we'll see what happens.
Oh,
with that.
Yeah. I remember one Brier we were in '95. Gerry Burtnick won it. We had push brooms, and I'm not exaggerating. 2 push brooms. The first push broom had frost going over the top of it like a snowplow, and the second push broom had frost going over the top of it, just on sweeping one rock. So we were plowing snow down the ice with horsehair brooms. If you threw another rock right down that same path right after that, you still got the same amount of frost again. How could that be? I don't know. It had so much frost on it. It came in at midweek, and it kind of went away near the end of the week. But there was a spell of about 3 days when it was so frosty. Yeah, you'd be no chance with a little flat broom that has a piece of material underneath it to have any effect.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how they pursue that. I want to get back to kind of your evolution as a curler, and I want to talk, of course, about the Ryan Express and the team that became infamous in some respects. I guess my first question, before we can talk about how you got together with that squad, was, do you feel any animosity that the way you chose to then move towards the game and play more of a hit style and be very, really hammer control as a strategy, which was successful for you? Do you feel any animosity that you're sort of pointed at as maybe the reason that the game became maybe less entertaining, and then, of course, the free guard zone came through it? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And at the time, I'm wondering how, was there sort of a sense of, gee, that Pat Ryan should play the game a different way, or how did you kind of deal with that?
Yeah, there's a few things in there I probably could say. I never felt animosity. So I kind of got my teeth were cut on playing against Ed Lukowich through the 80s. And that team he was a genius at manufacturing a lot of junk, and then him and his third were just so good at throwing big weight takeouts. So it's very similar to the style of curling you see today. That's what he would do. They were great hitters, but he's some kind of a genius, anyways, IQ wise. and he's kind of could figure out ways to make the house get complex, and that's the guy I played against. So I learned how to play the junk and the freeze and the tap and the chap off and set a rock over here, let them hit, and then finally you've got something to get around. So we played that junk a lot in Alberta, and then the hit was the one that always reconfigured everything to your advantage. So that's what we were doing in the 80s. When I went to the Brier in 85 and we lost to Hackner in that famous game where he made the shot for two in the 10th end, that was we were undefeated that year. And what happened basically is we just couldn't hold the lead for the last three ends because we couldn't take out guards. Our team wasn't strong enough to peel guard. So we were good enough to play the junk and all that stuff, but once we got a lead, we didn't have a defense. Well, we had our defense was as good as anybody else's, and that which wasn't the kind of defense you can see today. And the ice also wasn't as good back in those days, so you had to maybe be a bit of a better thrower to make those peels. And so what we did the next year is I just had my front end practice peels. That's all I did. And we have a practice and they just threw peels at one another. And Randy Ferbey and I, we would throw different shots, more finesse shots between us on the next sheet over. And that's basically, I didn't want a front end that couldn't peel. And so when we did go to the Brier in 88 and 89, basically we really saw it in 1989. We got a 1 point lead and we had the hammer against Rick Folk, and we got in trouble one end, and then our lead, they called our team Gypsy Rose. One of the media said that our team had become the best peeler since Gypsy Rose. I just remember that because our lead came out before the 8th end, and he said, let's just bring out Gypsy Rose here. And so that kind of made it simple for us, and we peeled for three ends. And that was the start of where the crowd, I think, come the 9th end, they were all in unison, saying boring, and they were going on about that. So I didn't feel bad about that because I thought I'd helped entertain them enough in 1985, and we couldn't keep it clean and we lost. Well, this time, I'm just going to try and get the win. And this seems to be a good strategy, and it did work out.
You were on the wrong end of the most famous shot possibly at the time, and maybe still to this day in Canadian curling history, right? So that kind of left you. I mean, well, what did that leave you with? What was your first gut reaction when that shot was made, and then following the game when it didn't go your way?
I think I was ready for him to make this shot because when I got down and looked at it from the other end, it actually looked like it was nicely lined up for them to, just guide it down and just miss the guard and probably make it. And so I was prepared for them to make the shot, completely prepared. I guess much like a golfer has to always consider the other person will make their shot. And then, when we lost, I was a bit stunned because we hadn't lost in so long. And it just seemed like we should just get to go play one more end, but we couldn't. It was over.
Well, and of course that shot that shot originally was to tie. You actually had hammer going into that next and extra end, I believe it was, right? And
yeah, we did, and again we couldn't peel, so we ended up with two guards up front, and they had one on the forefoot. And I was trying to double peel my first one, and then in the end I had to make the draw to the forefoot, which was missed it. But yeah, it all came down because we couldn't peel.
Well, yeah, and so given that experience, it's perfectly understandable that you would take the approach smartly to to say we need to become much better at this, and if we examine the way this game can be played, and I guess by that time as well, everyone had moved to push brooms. The ice was quite a bit straighter. How did you see the conditions changing as well that made it conducive to be able to do that, or was that something that maybe I'm sure there were teams that used to hit quite a bit prior to you, or not the case?
No, this was still impure ice and still corn broom. So there was all those things out there. But I always felt like, because I played front end, I could peel rocks. I was a good hitter. I guess maybe, that Manitoba tuck delivery that I had, I could peel rocks. I could go, honestly, a season without missing a peel. As a back ender, but a front ender, I could peel 15 rocks. And once I made one, I'd just make them all. Like you see Ryan, but when you've got that delivery, you can make them all. But my front end we never practiced it with them, and they just weren't quite as accurate. So, that's where they just practiced it and they got really good at it. And that was, there was still, the teams would still bring out corn brooms and try to change the ice on you so that you'd miss the peel. So it was quite, like I said, very complex. You really had to anticipate what the ice was going to do and make those shots back then, whether you sweep them. If you come off them too soon, they'll catch and cut right into the nose. So it was quite interesting.
And then you did adjust your thinking around the game, because as it moved into the 90s, the conditions, I think, became a little bit better. Certainly push brooms became much more and more prevalent, and the hitting game became even more. There were, and I think other teams certainly saw what you were doing and started to take a similar approach. And then, of course, we shifted to, I guess at first, within Canada, the 3-rock free guard zone. Now, if I recall, you were in the 93 Brier when you teamed up with Rick Folk. 93 was that the first year of no free guard zone, and then I think 94 was the first year. Is that not? That's the way I recall.
Yeah, we played. So just to correct you a little bit, through the 1980s, that really was almost any good team, they were on push brooms.
Yeah. But
they did have corn brooms too, so you could spice it up here and there throughout the game. Not too many. I don't think there was hardly any full-on corn broom teams after probably Rick Folk was the last team to win that, and that was 1980. He won the Brier with corn brooms. I don't think anybody won after that with just corn broom. So push broom was pretty dominant from the early 80s on, and Paul Gausel was to thank for that. His team was they mastered that and did so well with push broom. So we played international a lot through the 80s and Worlds, and there was free guard zone in some of those events. I really liked it because it reminded me of the games with Eddie Lukowicz where you made a point. Yeah, other teams are doing it. Yeah, it was crazy. If you lost the flip, teams would come out and just peel, and so it was frustrating to be on the receiving end of a team that got really good at peeling, and it wasn't that exciting to be the team that was winning by one because you were just peeling yourself. So there was a lot of very low scoring games through the latter part, like the late 80s, when teams all started to build on their defense rather than their offense, and they started to get that multi-dimensional skill going as a team. So I was definitely in favor of the free guard zone. I played it internationally, and I wanted it. But yeah, you're right. In 1993 was the last time we played, and there was no free guard zone. We played, Russ won that Brier. We lost the final. And the next year they put the free guard zone, which I was happy to see.
The year that you won, and I'm going to get to asking again about the 94 Brier, but just quickly, how did you and Rick get together? What was the start of that relationship?
Oh, well, it's kind of funny. we ended up playing in the Brier final in '89, and he was representing BC, I was representing Alberta, but I had already moved. Again, it was a career thing, so I left the Ryan's Express, which was probably a crazy thing when you look back on it, because we were such a good team. But I moved to Kelowna, and same curling club as Rick and his team, and the 5 of us flew to the Brier, but I was representing Alberta. I played there through the winter, and then we ended up playing in the final in '89. Then I moved to Kelowna, didn't curl for a year in any kind of zone play, and then the next year I asked Rick if he wanted to play together, and he was having a team change at the time, and that made sense that I would play third. 2 reasons: he never played anything but skip, and I was probably a better sweeper, and I liked the idea of playing third also and get kind of being in the mix with the guys. So we were a good match for one another in 1990. Well, when we get together, 1990, must have been 91 or 92, 91, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, Rick must have been happy when you approached him, because the fact that you moved into his home turf probably was going to create some additional competition. So it probably would help out if you weren't there.
It did kind of, we took Bert Gretzinger, Bert Gretzinger, me, him, and Gerry Richards. So it was kind of, the 3 top skips, and Gerry was a good front ender. So we had the 3 top skips all playing together, and then someone called us super team in the media, and that was kind of the thing they called us. And so it did give us an edge, but it did take us a couple of years to win BC with that team. And then in '93 we won it, and lost to Russ Howard in the final of the Brier. And then they made the free guard zone the next year, and so that was it's a funny one for those that remember me as a hitter. Well, that was the first free guard zone, and our team won that. So that was kind of neat to feel that we could also win when it wasn't when you did have to mix it up. But we had a very experienced team, so we could play all kinds of styles.
Yeah. So you return in 1994, and there's a story about the situation with the Rocks, and some stuff that gives a bit of, I think, history maybe on how Curling Canada, or I guess at the time as the CCA, maybe started to adjust and change the way rock choices were made. And I've heard this story from Gerry Richard had told it to me before. We talked about it at the Brier a bit last year. I'd love you to share kind of the setup and how this occurred, because I still think it's a fascinating story of competitiveness and competition, and maybe kind of start me through what happened as you're moving into the playoffs in '94, and how the choice of rock was determined, I guess, for the teams heading into the playoffs.
Okay, I think there's a precursor for this. It's all the different competitions I played in. It always became very confusing around the end, because the people that wrote the rules of curling, I don't know, they probably had to get voted on by all the different associations, and they were not necessarily the curlers that are the top caliber curlers, and they tended to shortcut or not think through all those different likelihoods and what would be the best way to write a rule that would accommodate something. If it's a 4-way tie, or if it's a 3-way tie, who beats who, what happens, who shoots first, who gets the hammer, what color rock, and they didn't think that rock color mattered or rock handles mattered. A rock was a rock. But the good curlers knew that some rocks were better than others, more consistent, or they were straighter, they curled more, or whatever. So every time we get in a playoff, they would have to create rules on the fly. And of course, that's silly, but I played in enough Canadian or Brier finals to have seen all these different combinations happen. And always they had to figure something out at the end. And so and then when there's a semifinal and then a final coming later, how do they decide who gets what rocks and when do they make that decision? So, the rule was that the team that finished first place got choice of rocks and last rock. And that was historically the way it was, even before we went to the page system. And, so it didn't say when you had to make that decision. So, I would always make the decision on choice of rocks. We finished first. I would wait until the semifinal was complete, and then I would choose most likely the same color that the team just won with, so that they would have to switch rocks, because you don't want them having one practice game with their rocks before they play in the final.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the way the rule allowed pre-1994. And as they got, I don't know, I guess it was someone decided to improve the rule, and they wrote down, to make it really clear, they said the team in first place has first choice of rock color, team in second place has second choice, and the team in third has third choice. But they didn't say when. That was all they said. They didn't say when the first place team.
And this would have been in 1994 when they rewrote the rules to include the three rock free guard zone. So they had essentially taken a new attempt to change the rules, and some new wording came in at that time that was different from prior Briers. Then,
yeah, they tried to clarify, but what they did is they had it was a reverse effect. It basically took the advantage away from the first place team, because they were, depending how you read it, because the rule was very unclear. They said you had first choice. It didn't say that you had to make it before the semifinal. You just had first choice of rocks. So you could argue, we would have argued, that the intent was to keep it the same as it always was, where you'd have the choice of rocks going into the final. But they wanted, they had said first, second, and third. So we said, well, we'll choose the rocks after the semifinal, and that'll be our choice.
Yeah, because that year it was just, there was no page system or anything like that. You were the first place overall team, and Manitoba and Ontario were second and third that year.
Yeah.
And so you had a bye at that point. You were going to wait. And so this would have been, I guess, probably Friday. You're done, and there'll be the semifinal Saturday, and then the finals on Sunday. So you've got that Saturday off.
Yeah.
Right?
So the intent, I think you're back to the first, the intention of the rule is to give the team in first place the advantage. So, of rock choice. But you don't want to give the next place team the advantage of practicing with the other, with their rocks. They're using the semifinal as their, getting comfortable with their rock. You don't want to flip that, because now those are actually they would rather play with those rocks. So they're actually getting first choice, coming into the final. So, and I know this is probably getting confusing and too complicated, but we didn't want to disclose our choice of rocks until we knew who we were playing. And most likely we would choose whatever color, which was always the way I would do it. I choose the rocks of the team that won. I choose that color.
Well, was it not that the CCA essentially pushed you following the round robin to say, prior to the semifinal, they asked you to choose your rocks at that point, correct?
Yeah, but see, because the rule was so odd, here's what happened. So they came to us and they said, yep, you have first choice. And we said, yep, we'll make our choice, as always, in the rules before. We make our first choice within 30 minutes after the completion of the semifinal. Mm-hmm. So that was the way it had been. So that was clear. As soon as the semifinal was finished, we had to declare our rocks right away, so the other team could test their rocks, go out and practice with their rocks, and then we both go on the ice basically with the same, advantage, not much of an advantage. And so when they came to us and said, choose your rocks, says, yes, we'll choose them 30 minutes after the final. for the semifinal. And they said, okay, that sounds good. That's fine. That's the way it's intended. And then they went back to, now you see, I can only tell you from my side because there's another locker room that would see it differently, of course. And then so when they went to Team Howard, they would have said, well, no, the rule says they have to choose first. And so then the CCA changed their mind and came back to us and said, okay, they don't agree, and they say that you have to choose first, so we think you should choose first. And then we said, well, now who's pushing who here? So then it became a little bit of each team was pushing back on whether we should choose or not. And the CCA went back and forth with us through the evening. And each time they left the locker room, they were agreed with the team, and they would go to the other team, and the other team would disagree, and then they'd come back. So they were, because the rules were written too simplified that you could interpret them either way. And that's what both teams were doing.
And wasn't your answer when they pushed you on the question to say, I choose the color of the stone of the winning team in the semifinal? Was that sort of the statement you tried to make?
Yeah, they said we had to choose. They said we had to choose color. So they came to us and said, no, you have to choose color. And so I said, okay. We picked the color of the team of the winning rocks in the semifinal. That's the color we pick. And the CCA said,
yeah.
They said, all right, you've chosen your color. You're going to throw that color. And they said, we'll accept that.
So at that point, they're satisfied.
They were, and then we never heard back from them. But I know that, that what happened. So we didn't know what color we'd be throwing. We just knew we were throwing that color. And the semifinal occurred. Ontario beat Manitoba.
So Russ Howard, the same team that had beaten you in the finals the year before. So it's a rematch at this point.
Oh yeah, it's a rematch. So there's rivalry going on for sure. And I'm not sure what happened there because I wasn't there in their locker room, but somehow they made some arguments to the CCA that they should be allowed any rocks in the house that they can pick from. And the CCA agreed to that. But they couldn't pick ours. We had to say the numbers on the rocks that we had sheet B, number 4 and 5, whatever. Mm-hmm. So our 8 rocks were preserved, but they had pick of every rock in the house. I think. Again, I could be totally wrong. So apologies to the team.
To your recollection, though, so Russ didn't really know about this situation until after his semifinal was played, or you don't recall. Like, in other words, he didn't find out that the color that he had chosen for that game was going to become your color until potentially after that game.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the CCA went back to Ontario and said, okay, they've picked their color, but we're not telling you what it is.
Yeah, perhaps,
Which would have been then. Now, at least it's fair for both teams in the semifinal because either way, it's not like you're going to be able to choose your advantage right off the bat. So I don't know what happened, but anyways, they did allow them to pick rocks from anywhere, and then they were also allowed to go on the ice and take off handles and change handles. So they may have ended up, I believe they did end up throwing some of their same rocks against us, just with a different colored handle on it.
Yeah. Now, was this a situation too where there was a lot of miscommunication? So you guys didn't even, the way I understood it is the whole handle changing. You guys weren't aware of it until it was even taking place. Although, I guess it was taking place under the guidance of the CCA at that point. So this would have been sometime Saturday night, correct?
Yeah, I think we had to come back to the rink because they were on the ice and our rocks were right beside them. Not that we would think they'd be taking the handles off our rocks, but just to make sure that what was going on was going to be okay. It's funny when you get to that kind of level, that the tiny little nuances of things that might shift a game, they become very important. So it's layers of the onions of complexity, the things that the people on TV wouldn't see, is that this went on through the night. So I think both teams probably didn't get that much sleep. And then when we walked on the ice, there was this whole hangover of all that crap that we were put through, just because the rules were really written by someone or some committee that really didn't foresee what problem they would cause by not making it clear.
You don't hold any animosity to Russ or his team, right? They were pushing, as we talked about before, right? Teams being competitive. They were pushing the way the rules could be interpreted for their benefit, and like your feeling, I think, was that you'd probably have done the same.
Oh, I don't know if I would have. I can't. I don't hold any animosity. I can't tell you what I would do if I was in their situation. I don't think I would have. Well, there was a rule that said you can't. There was a rule that said you cannot change rock handles. So that was also another funny thing, that they were the CCA allowed them to change rock handles, and that was a rule that said you couldn't. So it was. I mean, it just kept compounding. But eventually, boys, you got to go out and curl, all of us.
Yeah.
But because of that rule, it was so faded and unclear that it could be interpreted either way, and it lost the intent when they wrote it. It really made for a very difficult night leading up to that final for both teams. Maybe they got it corrected, but then when I look at the sweeping rule last year, well, they've taken everything out of that too. How could they remove all of these things that painstakingly were written about not causing a rock to slow down, or not, placing debris in front of the rock, and it was all gone. So basically, last year, you can't fault the teams for doing what the other teams were doing. Who started it? Who knows? But once it got started, everyone had to fall in and basically what we used to call cheat. But it wasn't cheating because there was no rule against it. But there certainly was rules against it back 15 years ago. It just somehow the rules got so simplified because of pure ice conditions and the no corn room, that it left the door wide open for a simple thing like a scratchy broom head to become a legal instrument on the ice. And so you had everybody out there, and it was just a carving fest. It was a shame, and it's just really good that it only took 1 year to fix it. And hopefully next year, the players will see the evidence that it's back to shot making and not.
And where it should be. Well, yeah, and it's interesting, right? Curling is a game and a sport that, a little bit like golf, has sort of held to a belief that it's gentlemanly, it's self officiated. But the truth is, as in any sport, it's still, there's a requirement for an athlete to know where's my limit. Because if I'm competing at the highest level and I want to win an Olympic gold, or I want a Brier or World Championship, I need to know where that is, because there are always going to be people that push that, and then at some point the other teams almost have to follow suit. And I don't think it was new, this concept of teams pushing, just last year, and we've even talked, in this last hour plus, about the fact that that's been going on for as long as the game's probably been around, and trying to gain an advantage. So it's also, it's largely a responsibility, I think, for the governing bodies to be as in front of it as possible. Sometimes not easy to do. But yeah, it's fascinating how, it seemed like a new story last year, but in some respects it's an old story that we've heard before in other aspects of curling.
I think so, but then again, it's funny how, you know, there's a generation gap, and then it's all fresh and new again, and we have to start back at point zero. But the officiating back in the 80s was, those guys were like hawks watching for any kind of mismovement of the push broom, and you got called on it, and the rock would get removed. So they were out there intervening a lot. But last year at the Brier, I was a coach, so I spoke with the officials about what was going on, and in my opinion, they didn't even really see what was going on. The officials are not necessarily artists at high level curling sweeping. They're kind of watching for other. They become trained to watch for other things, and they don't understand to the level of what the teams do, of what's going on the ice. So they're pretty well oblivious to what was going on. And even if they did see it, there was nothing in the rules that said that they could step in and stop it
and take action.
It,
yeah,
it became a landslide. It just was a landslide of that going on, and it was easy to see who was probably going to emerge, but definitely into the playoffs.
Yeah,
last year.
It'll definitely be interesting to see how things look this year, and maybe 2015, 2016 curling season is just going to have a big asterisk on it. Years from now, maybe the next controversy will arise, and we'll have to go back and take a look at what happened last year again, as the next generation experiences the new controversy, right? So
I don't know I can't foresee what that next controversy will be, especially now that they've got that figured out. But you're right. Something will pop up.
Yeah.
But it's good that they responded, and today we have the World Curling Federation, which is it's way more influential at shifting and correcting things than the CCA. We kind of like to think as Canadians we lead, but I saw at the Brier there was no way that this rule change would have come about, just because there's so few people that even understood what was going on, that would speak out against it in Canada. But in the world, you have all those different nations, and those different teams, they were the ones that caused the rule to change so quickly and called the summit, and Canada was one voice and one vote there, and so I think that's kind of how it worked. But luckily, the World Curling Federation is packed a punch, and they're influential, and they move quick. Otherwise, it would have went another year, and then you would have seen fisticuffs out on the ice a few times, I'm sure.
I don't think we want to see that.
When the curlers are stuck you're stuck in a quandary between what's right and what's wrong in the sport like curling. It's tough, but they fixed it quickly, and I thought they would, and they did, so that's good.
That's great. Well, hey, I appreciate you doing this, Pat, and it's been a enjoyable conversation. And anything else you got to add? You're still coaching, I assume. You're still are you going to pursue curling competitively until the grandmaster's age, or are you settled in behind the sheet now?
I'm not going to. I don't think I'm going to coach anymore. I don't really like that. I don't really like sitting behind the sheet watching it. You really have very little to do when you're doing that. There's a little bit more about just sort of managing the logistics of the event.
So you're not giving signals? Is that what like your dad used to?
Oh, yeah. Basically, the teams don't even look for them because they know what they're doing out there by the time they get there. So I'm not going to coach this year, other than probably do some throwing coaching. Probably my gift back to players is that I can. I'm like a swing coach in golf, throwing coach. So I can work with players and fix their little idiosyncrasies for them so they can shoot a higher percentage more consistently. So that's kind of the thing that
If you start with some of the younger players,
one-on-one.
you could bring back the Manitoba tuck.
Well, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't, whatever slide someone has, I can generally work with them and get them to make some consistent, better outcomes. So that's probably the thing that I can do. And I like doing that. I like going on the ice with somebody and work with them and helping them understand the things they're doing right and the things they want to correct, and getting them so they can make it 8 run backs in a row kind of thing rather than 1 out of 8 if there's something going wrong. So I like to do that. I'll probably still do some of that. I'll still work with Jimmy Cotter and my team there on that kind of thing, but I won't be at this point. I won't be traveling with them to their events. And whether I go back and curl or not, I don't know. I'm 60 now, for another day at least, and so I could go in the next level if I felt like it, and I could do that. But at this point in time, I don't know. I may just give it another year before I think about whether I want to go after that next curling title.
All right. Well, it was great chatting with you, Pat, and all the best.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. All the best. Thanks for having me.